We're getting $200 to make a shoe, so we're going to speed run this. Let's see what we can do. If you want to learn more about the tools and techniques, you're going to see me using this video. If you want to learn how to do product visualization or use Blender 3D as a professional, check out my Blender course. We'll teach you everything. Now let's get to work. I got a couple of references that I'm going to work with. This was sent to me by the person that wants me to do the shoe for them. All you got to do is go to top view and just drag and drop a PNG image into Blender. Now you can set this up, add some transparency using this menu over here on the side. And I'm going to start by modeling the bottom of the shoe. We got a plane right here. I'm going to add 2 levels of subdivision surface. And with W, I'm going to subdivide this so I have some more geometry. I'm also going to use W loop tools to turn this into a circle. If you're using Blender 4.2, you got to download loop tools. But if you're using Blender 4.1 or older, you can just go up here to edit preferences, add-ons, and type in loop tools right here and check this box, and now you can turn your geometry into circle, and you can do all kinds of other stuff with these tools. So we're going to try to align this with the tip of the shoe like this approximately. We're going to take the geometry down here and flatten it out. We're going to scale it up a little bit more so we get this part on the side here right. Push this over here to the left and also align this vertex with the left side and this one with the right side. Now we're going to take this geometry and lower it down to around here somewhere. I'm going to try and use as little geometry as possible so I can easily control the shape of this object. If I have a whole bunch of geometry like this, it makes it very difficult to control the general shape of this object. Whereas if I have very little geometry, you can see that moving one vertex changes the shape quite significantly. So we're going to bring this towards the middle, push this over here to the left side as well. Give me some more loop cuts over here. I'm going to push this over here to the side, push this one to the side as well. And this part is pretty easy. We just have to keep extruding this down to the bottom and reshaping it a little bit. Maybe add another loop cut over here and bring this inwards. Once we get to the bottom, we're going to make this part a little bit more round using this geometry. And before you know it, we got the shape of the bottom of this shoe. So now we're going to start adding some thickness to the shoe. I've got a picture of the side of the shoe right here, but I want to be able to look at it when I go to side view. So I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to press number 3 on the numpad to enter side view. And then I'm going to drag and drop this image into the scene again like this. We're going to throw this into the background so it's not colliding with the mesh. Lower it down just a little bit, and we have to match the size with this surface that we just modeled. So we're going to place this image over here so that the back of the shoe matches the end of this line over here. Then we're going to place the 3D cursor right there. Use the 3D cursor as a pivot point and scale this image from that point so we know that this stays fixed, but this has to be a little bit longer or shorter or whatever the case may be. So we're going to scale it a little bit like this, and now we're good to go. It's really important that we get the curvature down here correctly. And again, this is only going to work because we have very few edges over here from the side view, which means we can very easily just pick up a few of these edges and lift them up a little bit. And as you can see, just like that, we can create a curved shape over here. So we're going to lower this down a little bit to get to the bottom. Now in wireframe view, we're going to use the box select tool to select some geometry from the back. The reason that we have to go to wireframe is because if you're in solid view and use the box select tool, you're not going to be able to select the geometry which is covered by other geometry. But if you're in wireframe, you can select everything. We're going to rotate this a little bit and lift it up a bit like this. We got a little bit of folding over here because these vertices are not all at the same level. It's probably not going to be a problem, but if it's a problem, you can just select these 2 vertices and join them with J and take this vertex and lower it down a little bit to correct the shape. Now you can make this completely flat from side view, but I don't want to do that, so I'm going to get rid of this vertex and just do it like this. Over here in the front, we have to lift this up a little bit further. We're also going to rotate this part in the front. And you don't have to be too exact because this is hardly going to be visible at all. Just try to get it as close as possible. It's impossible to get it perfectly right. Now we're going to select the entire surface with A and extrude it with E. That's going to add a little bit of thickness so we can create the rest of this part. We're also going to scale everything down on the Z axis to make this part a little bit more straight and then lift it up a little bit more. Take this geometry from the back here and lift that up a little bit more again. Deselect this part with the brush select tool with C and middle click and just keep going towards the back until you get this part of the curve right. Also keep in mind that we have some perspective distortion. If you look at this from side view, it's probably supposed to be completely straight, but the camera is a little bit above the shoe, so it looks like there's a curve here, but it's actually supposed to be straight. So with that in mind, we're going to make sure this is completely flat, and we're also going to have to do the same thing down here at the bottom. The bottom might be a little bit raised so your shoe can kind of roll, but that's probably not the case for a shoe like this because this is not a running shoe. So this here looks like it's angled just slightly, but not much because we have a little shadow down here. Now we got the rough shape of the bottom part of the shoe, given that we still have to make these edges sharp by adding some supporting geometry and so on. But before we start adding any details, we're going to duplicate this with Shift D and throw it somewhere to the side in case we fuck something up. We can just go back to the basic shape and start over. Once we start adding details, it's going to be very hard to undo that stuff. So first of all, let's select all the sharp edges with Alt and Shift, Alt right click. You can just select a few of them and press Shift G, select similar face angles. You can set the angle down here to something like 0.1 or 2. That should quickly select all your sharp edges. Now we can press Ctrl B to add a bevel to sharpen this. We're going to scroll up one so that we have 2 segments, and we're going to set the shape value here to 1 so we get a right angle. That's going to be perfect supporting geometry for the subdivision surface modifier. Now let's look at this from side view again to see if the shape looks all right. It looks pretty good more or less. I think it looks pretty good, so we're going to keep going. we're going to have to add a loop cut over here to create this part where we have some stitches. Let's select this image and go to the object data properties and check opacity and reduce that a little bit so we can see this scene a little bit better. You're also going to be able to see the keys that I'm pressing a bit better since the image is not so bright, plus my eyes aren't going to hurt too much. Now it looks like this loop cut is placed pretty well. We're just going to take this part and lower it down a little bit to make this part of the curve smoother. Normally when you add a loop cut, it kind of conforms to the top and the bottom edge loop, which means if it's at the top, it's going to have a different shape than it would if it's at the bottom. So in this case, we're going to take this loop cut and slide it up with double G all the way up. That way it's going to take the shape of this top edge loop, which means it's going to be perfectly aligned with the top edge. Now we're just going to lower it down a little bit on the Z axis to keep that shape. We might have to take some geometry over here and correct it just a little bit like this, but now this shape should be pretty damn good. So now we have to use this edge loop to create this little gap where we're supposed to place the stitches. And to do that, we're going to press Ctrl B to bevel this. This time we only want one segment, so we're going to scroll all the way down. You probably want to be inside view when you do this so you can get the thickness right. It's approximately like this. Now in face select mode with Alt right click, we're going to select this edge loop and press Alt E, extrude faces along normals. Now you can extrude this outwards or inwards as you please, and it's going to be even on every part of this segment. Alternatively, you can press E to extrude, right click to cancel it, and press Alt S to control this again. That's the method that I prefer. I don't know why. Now we're just going to push this inwards a little bit like this. In edge select mode, we're going to take these edge loops from the outside and bevel them with Ctrl B to sharpen them. I think that looks pretty good. So now let's go to Object Shade Smooth. If you still want to adjust the thickness of this gap later, you can just go to vertex select mode and select this part with Alt right click. Then press Ctrl plus to expand the selection to the next two edge loops, and with Shift Alt right click, you're also going to add this one. Now with the G and Z, you can just lift this up a little bit or lower it down. Just remember that this might not be aligned if you change the shape, because this is going to move in a different direction. You might see some imperfections, but in this case, the minor changes aren't going to make any difference. Now that this thing is ready, let me show you a great way to add stitches. Now, the following method is not going to work very well if you're worried about the polygon count. If you're doing game asset creation or something like that, you don't want to have too much geometry because it's going to make that shit slow. It's difficult for a computer to process lots of geometry, and game engines have to process it very quickly, so it's going to slow it down. But in this case, we're doing product visualization, so we just want this to look good. We don't care how long it takes to render, which means we can use as much geometry as we need. So now here's how you do stitches. I'm going to press 3 to go to face select mode, and for some reason, if you're using Blender 4.2, they also remove this. So now it's no longer 1 for vertex select mode, 2 for edge select mode, 3 for face select mode. Now, I don't know what it is, but now you gotta adjust these shortcuts manually. So you can just go right click, assign shortcut, then press 1, and I'm doing this for vertex select mode. For edge select mode, I'm going to assign shortcut 2, and for face select mode, I'm going to press number 3. It's inconceivable for me why they would remove these shortcuts, but that's what it is. So now in face select mode with 3, we're going to do Alt right click to select this face loop, Shift D to duplicate, right click to snap it back into place, then press P to separate by selection. And in object mode, you're going to take this segment that you just separated. In edit mode, you're going to add a loop cut right here. Then while that loop cut is still selected, press Ctrl I and press X, delete vertices. Now you just have a thin string going all the way around this shoe. I wanted to inflate this a little bit with Alt S, but as you can see, it doesn't move in the right direction. The reason I'm inflating this is so that I can move it a little bit closer to the surface so we can have some space for the stitches. But now I'm going to have to undo a couple of steps to where I deleted this geometry right here. And now if I select everything and press Alt S, now it's going to move in the right direction. So now I'm just going to bring this a little bit closer to the surface, as you can see right here on the inside. And once I've done that, then I can delete this geometry. As you can see, now I can see the string anywhere I look around this shoe. And now we're going to use this to create the stitches. So first, let's duplicate this again in case we fuck something up and place it over there. Then we're going to take this curve and we're going to go to the modifiers tab and apply the subdivision surface modifier with Ctrl A. And I'm trying to make it so that each of these edges can be turned into a single stitch. Now I can see in the reference that these stitches are pretty big, so I think this is going to work. But if not, that's why I got a backup, so I can maybe apply 3 levels of subdivision, and that way I'm going to have more edges, so they're going to be smaller. But now in edit mode, you have to select all this geometry and press W loop tool space. That's going to make all the edges equally long. So now you're going to select everything and press V to tear, but then right click to snap it back into place. That's going to disconnect all the vertices, so you're going to have individual edges which are not connected. You might get some parts where it's still not disconnected properly, so in that case, just select everything again and press V and right click again. Now all the edges are separate, so we're going to change the pivot point to individual origins, so we can scale these down individually like this. We're going to scale them down a little bit so we have a little bit of space between those stitches. Now with W, we're going to subdivide this 2 times so we get some more geometry. That way when we apply a subdivision surface modifier and we extrude, these corners here are going to be tight. Now select a single vertex at the end of one of the stitches and press Shift G, select similar amount of connecting edges. That's going to select all the vertices which are at the end. Now again, we screwed up because we want to move all these vertices inwards, and Alt S is not going to allow us to do that. So we're going to have to add a little bit of thickness so that we have some face normal. So we're going to extrude this up a little bit and lift it up on the Z axis. Select all the faces and press E to extrude this inwards a little bit. They're all going to move individually because we have individual origins up here. Now, while the faces on the inside are still selected, press X, delete faces only. Now we also have to select a couple of the faces at the top and press Shift G, select similar normal. That's going to select all the faces which are facing upwards. Press X and delete faces. Then select the surface at the bottom like this, press Shift G, select similar normal again, then switch to vertex select mode and press Ctrl minus. That's going to make it so that you have only the inner vertices here selected. Now you can press X, delete vertices. I realize at this point that this is a little bit too much work, so it probably would have been better if we just made one of these stitches and used an array modifier. But now we already got this far, so fuck it. Now we're going to select all this geometry and lower it down a little bit like this. Select one of the vertical edges and press Shift G, select similar direction. You might want to look around to make sure that all the vertical edges have been selected. Then with individual origins, you're going to scale all those edges down to 0. Now this is once again going to become infinitely thin. Make sure that when you do this, you select everything and press M, merge by distance. My shortcut for that is Shift W. And I do acknowledge that there was definitely a quicker way to do this, but I'm going to keep this in the video because now you maybe picked up a couple of new techniques, so now you can use this shit for something else. Give me some light, it's dark as fucking here. Now with Ctrl A, you're going to apply the subdivision surface modifier here. With this object selected in object mode, go up here to object, convert, click on curve. Now this is a curve and it's no longer regular geometry, so now you can go over here to curve properties, go down to where it says geometry and open that up. In the bevel section of that menu, you're going to add some depth. If we click here once, that's a little bit too much, so we're going to change this number from 0.01 to something like 0.004 and just play around with this number a little bit until it looks like the stitches are approximately correct in thickness. Object, shade smooth. Once you got the right thickness, we're going to go back here to object, convert to mesh. Now this is mesh, so if you want to make these stitches larger or smaller, you can select all of them and go to individual origins and scale them down or scale them up a little bit. That's up to you. You can also select them all and use Alt S to inflate them or deflate them a little bit to make them thinner. Now I think my stitches are going to look pretty good. I'm currently in solid view and I got some cavity shading going on, which makes the shading a little bit exaggerated. So if I want to get a better idea of what this is going to look like, I can go over here to material preview. Now we don't have the cartoonish shading anymore, so now I can get a better idea of how these stitches look. I think they look pretty damn good, so now let's move on. Let's talk about what we're going to do next for a couple of seconds. As you can see, this top part of the shoe that hugs your feet, it consists of multiple different parts. You got a big piece back here, and then that's stitched onto another part, which is over here in the front. Now, I've modeled shoes before, so I know that this front part is probably also connected to this part over here that goes on top of your foot. But we're going to start by modeling the largest part, which is going to be this, and then we can do everything else from there. Now, before we continue, I also noticed that this edge over here should be a little bit softer. We can try fixing that by taking this edge loop with Alt right click and then using Alt S to deflate that a little bit. You can also press double G to slide it down a little bit more, and that's going to make this part a bit more round. Now we can get back to that later, but for now, let's start making the top part of the shoe. So we're going to take this same edge loop that we have selected over here, or maybe it'll be better if we take the inner edge loop, but we can't select that in one go. So instead in face select mode, we're going to select the face segment. Then in vertex select mode with Shift Alt right click, we're going to deselect this vertex loop. That only leaves us with this inner edge loop, so we can just press P to separate that. When you separate this by selection, it automatically duplicates it, so you have a new object with this edge loop. Now let's start by extruding this up a little bit on the Z-axis. We can cut it over here in the front, so we can get rid of this geometry. We have to separate it over here in the front, so we're going to take these faces in the front, and with P, we're going to separate them to a new object. We're going to leave that there for later, and now we're going to focus on this part. Let's start by aligning this geometry over here in the front. So we're going to take this vertex and slide it down with double G, and notice how I use my box select tool to select this, because that way when I'm in wireframe view, I also select this vertex in the back, whereas if I just right click on the vertex, I'm only going to select one of the vertices. So take that, slide it down with double G, do the same thing with these vertices over here, then take this one and slide it up a little bit with double G. We can also move this backwards a bit. This part we're going to lift up a bit and just keep doing that until we get all the way over here to the back where we have this corner, and this is where things are going to get a little bit more interesting because we're going to have to use a lot more geometry to do this properly. Over here we have to make a sharp corner, so we're going to select these two vertices, press N to open this menu on the side, go to item, transfer. Down here, you're going to find mean vertex crease, set that to 1. Now these corners are completely sharp. And now let's try taking these two edges in the back here and extruding them upwards a little bit to make this part. Take this part and push it backwards a little bit. Give me another loop cut over here. That way I have a little bit more geometry so I can slide this to the front, bring this over here, and with a little bit of work I can align this inner black line with this gap here between the gray part and the white part. Give me one more loop cut over here so I can slide these two vertices down and take this one to the top, bring this around over here. We're definitely going to need a loop cut over here to add some more geometry to this part so we can pull this backwards. And this part is a little bit tricky because we really stretched out these faces, so instead we're going to add 2 more loop cuts here. But we have to be careful because once we add those 2 loop cuts, it changes the shape of this object because of the subdivision surface modifier. So since we added new geometry, we're going to select this arc here in the back, loop tool space. Now you can adjust the shape by scaling it a little bit. We're going to do the same thing over here on this next edge loop like this. this. So W loop tool space. In this case, it looks like W loop tools relax is going to work better. And we still have to manually adjust some of this geometry so it's not so busted up. These vertices over here, we're going to inflate with Alt S. Same thing with these vertices over here. We're going to take them and use Alt S to inflate them. Slide this a little bit so we don't have this zigzag shit. Bring these out a little bit more. Now let's go back to side view and see what that looks like. As you can see, because of the new geometry, now this looks a lot more inflated. So we got to fix it up still. So we're going to move this a little bit closer. And now we're also going to have to change the width of this part that goes on your Achilles tendon. So take this and scale it down a little bit on the x-axis. Same thing with this one. But to do this part right, we're definitely going to need to have an extra image. So I'm going to pull out a back view picture of this shoe and place it right around here somewhere. As you can see, again, there's a little bit of perspective distortion, so we can't really tell what's going on. But we do know that this part at the top here is supposed to be a pretty straight horizontal line, which means we're going to have to take some of the vertices over here and scale them down on the z-axis. Maybe also lift these up a little bit. And this is the part where you have to mess around with some of the vertices and try sliding them around or inflating them and deflating them with Alt S. And you just have to fuck around with the geometry until something kind of works. Next, we have to work on the shape over here in the middle of the shoe. And for that, I'm going to pull out another image which shows me the shoes from top view. We're going to try to align this picture with the model that we have so far. And first, I want to do something about this big dent over here on the inside of the shoe. So to adjust that, I'm first going to take this vertex and slide it down to straighten this part out. Then I'll take these three vertices, or rather these two edges over here, and inflate them a little bit with Alt S. Then deselect this vertex and take it a little bit further. And once again, I'm going to keep messing around with some of the geometry here by inflating and deflating some of the faces and sliding some of the vertices until I get what looks like an image that I have on my second screen. This is the part that I can't really teach you. There's no right or wrong way to do this. You just have to screw around with the geometry a little bit and try to figure out a way to make it look like your reference image. Now, after a little bit of work, I'm happy with the approximate shape that I have on the outside of this shoe. We're going to get back to this later, but now we're going to try to add some thickness to the inside of the shoe. So once again, I'm going to duplicate this and throw it to the side somewhere as backup. And to add some thickness, I don't want to use a solidify modifier. I'm just going to select this entire surface, extrude right click Alt S to push it inwards like this. I'm going to delete all the faces on the inside and also these faces over here at the bottom. We got to do something about the creases over here because right now the vertices are creased, which means they're sharp. So we're going to select these vertices and set their mean creases back to 0. And then we're going to select the edges and increase the edge crease like this. That's going to allow us to still keep this shape without having a big mess on the vertices. Now let's take this geometry from the back and bring it somewhere around here. Do the same thing with these vertices over here. And we're going to keep going all the way around this shape until we align everything with this inner part of this white part. We got to select this face loop and deselect the vertex loop in the middle and set the mean crease here to 1 to make this sharp. Once we do that, we're also going to need another loop cut over here, which we can inflate with Alt S to make this inner part more round. As you can see, this part has to look a little bit softer. So if we inflate this, it changes the shape the way we want it to. I'm going to select individual segments of this inner part and I'm going to go to top view and adjust them a little bit on the side. So I'm going to keep aligning these segments one by one until everything looks more or less straight. Now you have to pay very close attention to the details because you're going to notice that this white cushioning is only present over here in the back and the middle part here, but you're not going to see any of that down here where you got the holes for the laces. Now it would be great if I had this shoe right here with me so I can open that shit up and see what's underneath this surface, and also if I could see how everything is connected beneath the surface, but I can't do that, so we're going to have to go off of the images. The good thing is that they sent me lots of images so I can see pretty well what I'm supposed to do. If you don't got a lot of images, good luck. Now I don't know at which point this cushioning is supposed to disappear, so at this point I'm just going to make this surface a little bit thinner over here in the front. Now I'm pretty happy with this shape right now. We're probably going to adjust it later on. Right now I want to create this part which holds the laces because that's going to significantly change the shape, and then I'm going to be able to tell what to do next. So we're going to take these edges over here and give me some mean creases to sharpen that. Then we're going to select this entire edge loop over here, P to separate that to a new object, which is also going to duplicate it, and extrude this out to around here somewhere. Slide this down because this part is supposed to be nice and round. We still have to slide some of these vertices here individually to adjust the shape. Bring this a little bit further to the back. Give me another loop cut up here so I can control this shape better. We're going to select everything and set the mean crease here to 0, but this corner I want a mean crease of 1 on both of these edges. Same thing over here in the front. This part is supposed to be sharp. And now once we got the shape from side view, now we're supposed to take this and push it inwards a little bit. And now you're going to see that even though we align this properly from side view like this, when you go to top view, it looks like it's completely off. It's way further to the front than it should be. This is the type of shit that happens when you're dealing with pictures taken in real life, because perspective distortion and slightly different angles make the object look completely different in different pictures. So once again, if you don't have this object with you in real life, good luck to you, because that makes it a lot harder to make. This part over here is supposed to be a little bit closer to the sides, but this part is supposed to be a little bit further inwards. Now also give me another loop cut over here, which I can inflate. And after we work with this surface a little bit, we're going to go over to the modifiers tab. This time we are going to try and use a solidify modifier, and we're going to have to place that after the subdivision surface modifier using this side button right here. here. That way it first gets subdivided and then it gets extruded. So now we have some thickness, but the surface is still smooth. And now one thing we can do is set the first subdivision to level 1, then collapse that and add another subdivision surface modifier, set that to level 1 as well. And now first the surface gets subdivided once, then it gets extruded with the solidify modifier, and then the whole extruded shape gets subdivided one more time by this next subdivision surface modifier. And now we can inset this surface with I to get some extra supporting geometry. But before we do any of that crazy shit, let's apply one level of subdivision surface, then apply the solidify modifier. And now we have lots of geometry that we can use to control this shape. So now that we have a bit more geometry, we can do some stuff like make this corner a little bit sharper. But it turns out that this shape is not supposed to be so thick, so we gotta undo something until before we apply the solidify modifier. And now I tried messing around with this shape for a little bit. I don't know if it's right, but for now it'll do, so we're probably gonna get back to it later. Let's go up here to the top and take these faces and extrude them up a little bit, because we're still supposed to have some cushioning over here on this part. Now making these two shapes fit somewhat correctly was a headache, so I don't really know how to explain this shit to you. And now we're gonna take this inner vertex loop here without these edges over here in the front, extrude that and push it down on the z-axis a little bit. Over here in the back, we're gonna place the 3D cursor right here and select all this geometry and lower that down a little further. And now we're also gonna have to add one of these on the other side. I'm not gonna show that on camera because I got some fixing to do on this part. But once we do that, we're gonna move over to the front of the shoe where we got the cap. So let's fast forward to the fucking cap. We're going to make the cap the same way that we made the rest of the shoe body. So we're going to take some edges from the front over here like this. With P, we're going to separate them to new object. Now take this front part and extrude it up a little bit. After we extrude it up, we're going to go to side view and we're going to extrude it again and push it backwards this time. Once we've done that, we're going to fill a new face between these two edges back here. And now we can use this geometry to adjust the shape of this surface so it fits well with the rest of the shoe. Now we might have to use some extra geometry to get this shape right. For example, we can add a loop cut right here because we have to pay close attention. This thickness of this edge right here has to be even. So we can't have one part where this gap here is really large and another part where it's really small. That's going to look messy and it's going to look like shit. So we're going to slide these edges around. We're going to inflate and deflate stuff a little bit. We have to do the same thing on the other side of the shoe, and it's really important that both sides have the same thickness on this little edge right here. And once we got the rough shape of the cap, we're going to go back to side view and start creating this upper part. First, we got to make sure that this curve fits with the reference image. And at that point, we can take these two edges and move them backwards a little bit like this. We're going to connect this vertex to the side right here and this one to this side. And that way we can just use these two edges to extrude this upper part of the shoe. Now again, you're going to have to keep making minor adjustments to make sure that everything fits reasonably well. And later on, we're probably going to apply one level of subdivision surface so that we can have more geometry to give us more control over the shape. But for now, we're just going to keep it low poly because we just want to get a very basic shape for this. So we're going to keep extruding this up to the top over here. And it looks like this part is supposed to be a little bit wider. So we should probably use some geometry from the bottom to extrude the sides here as well. And to do that, we can just extrude this like this and connect these two edges with a face. Same shit over here on the other side. And then once we get to the top, we can bring these vertices down here so we match the width over here. Bring this up so we're at the top as well. And extrude this a little bit further, and now you just have to match this geometry with the reference image. And once we got this shape taken care of pretty well, we're going to go object shade smooth. And let's also extrude this and give it a little bit of thickness with Alt S. And after we create some thickness, we're going to get some faces down here which make this shape a little bit too round. I think it's going to be better if we take these faces over here and delete them, but I might be wrong. So once we delete these faces, you can see that the shape here changes completely. But I think it wasn't too bad while we had these faces down here, and it might be better if we just add a loop cut to tighten this a little bit. When we have faces down here, this surface kind of curves inwards, and I think it creates a pretty natural transition between this surface and this one. So we're going to keep everything as it is for now. Maybe give me another loop cut up here at the top to tighten up this part. But if you look at the top view image, it looks like the top of the shoe is a lot more inflated. There's a lot more cushioning in this part. So we're going to take these faces from the front over here and inflate them a little bit with Alt S. And now we're also going to have to make the white surface on the inside, which might be a little bit difficult. Because to do that, we have to extrude this entire inner surface and give it some more thickness. And to do that, we first have to select that entire surface, which is going to be the tricky part. So the right way to select it would be to first select this outer face loop, then select all the faces on the outside, because it's pretty easy to select those because we can see them. And now we have all the faces selected except the inner faces. So we can just press Ctrl I to invert the selection. Now we have all the inner faces selected, and we're going to press extrude, right click, Alt S to push all of this inwards. And this is the surface that we're going to use to create the inner white cushioning part. So maybe we can take this edge loop over here and bevel it a little bit with Ctrl B to create the gap. We can then take this segment which we created with the bevel and extrude extrude it and use Alt S to push it inwards a little bit if we want to create a real gap. And now we can use Shift Alt right click to deselect these edge loops, and we're only going to have these connecting edges selected. So we can go to individual origins, scale this to 0, merge vertices by distance, and that creates only a tiny little gap, as you can see right here. We can easily control the thickness of this gap by selecting this inner vertex loop and using Alt S to inflate or deflate it. And once again, when we go to material shading, you can see that that looks pretty good. Now that this part is finished, let's start adding some of the exterior details, like these little surfaces back here, whatever this is, these little holes and everything else. Now here's how we're going to make the surface details. We're first going to duplicate this surface with Shift D. Then we're going to apply, let's say, 2 levels of subdivision surface. 2 is a little bit too much. Let's do 1 instead. And now we have lots of geometry that we can use to create these little surfaces over here. So let's start by creating this little piece in the back here. We're going to do that by selecting all the faces around that. And make sure that you also do this on the other side of the shoe, because this is probably symmetrical. Now with P, we're going to separate this to new object. So now we cut out that shape from this object where we applied the subdivision surface modifier. So we're going to remove this for now, and now we can just shape this surface while we still have this low poly surface underneath to see how they match. So let's add another subdivision surface modifier to this surface just so we get the round edges, and now we just start shaping it. So now we're going to slide these vertices around a little bit. I think we can probably get rid of these here. Now slide these backwards and slide these backwards a little bit as well. Make sure you move these with double G so that they always stay on the surface. If you're inside view and you move these edges with G, you're going to lift them off the surface. Whereas if you move them with double G, they're always going to slide along the edges, which we already have here. So they're going to stay stuck to the surface. So we can slide these vertices all the way up like this. We can delete these vertices down here so we get a little gap. And then we can use these vertices to shape out this curve. So slide this up, slide this up, slide this to the side a little bit, slide this up and to the right a little bit. I think we also better delete these. And now let's see what happens when we try adding a solidify modifier. As we add a little bit of thickness, now you can see the rough shape of this object that we just created, and it looks like this part is not supposed to be so sharp, so we better take this vertex over here and slide it a little bit further like this. And once we got the shape down more or less, we also have to think about how we're going to connect this surface up here at the top. So in this case, we're going to have to kind of tuck this in so it connects into this seam and it doesn't stick out so far. So maybe we can just take this edge loop around the edge at the top and use Alt S to deflate that and push it inwards like this. And now that looks like it connects pretty well, so I think this is going to be pretty good. Let's duplicate this so we have a backup, because now we're about to start applying some modifiers. First, we're going to apply the subdivision surface with 1 level. Then we're going to apply the solidify modifier. Now let's select all the geometry and get rid of all the creasing. And now we can try selecting all the sharp edges and beveling them to control the shading a little bit. As you can see, when we do that, it looks pretty damn good, especially if we go to material preview. Now, when I bevel this, I'm not going to use 2 segments, but I'm only going to use 1 segment. And the reason for that is that when you use 1 segment, the shading around this segment becomes totally different. When I use 2 segments and a shape value of 1, all the smooth shading is contained within this bevel. But if I use just 1 segment, as you can see, we still get some smooth shading around the edges over here, which makes it look a little bit softer. It's still a lot sharper than it was before, but it looks a lot better this way. Now, if we add some more subdivision surface, which we probably will because I want to make this look very realistic and smooth, we also get rid of this shitty shading which we have here because of the low poly surface. So here's the difference between no subdivision surface and subdivision surface. That's pretty good. Now let's move on to these things over here on the side, and then after that we're going to do the stitches. Now here's what I think will be the best strategy to do this. We're going to create this surface with all the jagged edges that you see here, and then we're going to use a shrink wrap modifier to project that onto this surface below, and then we can extrude this and add some solidity, and then we can work on the stitches and whatever else. So first, let's place the cursor right here and add a new plane. We're going to flip that plane sideways so that it's facing us. Now we're going to scale it up on the Z-axis like this, and I want a couple of loop cuts here so that I have square faces over here instead of one long face. Now we're going to rotate this into place. We're going to scale it down so that these outer edges fit the bottom of these little triangular cuts. And now we need some more geometry so that we can make the little triangles. We're going to try to make it so that each of these faces is approximately as large as one of these little triangles. And then once we have that, we just have to select this edge on the side like this. And I don't know of a way to extrude these edges individually at the same time, but I do know that you can do that with faces. So we're going to turn these into faces first by extruding this. Then we're going to select this surface and press Alt E, extrude individual faces like this. Now these faces are disconnected, so now we just have to go to top view and select a surface from the side like this. Delete all that geometry. Now we have a 2-dimensional surface. Now we can't select all these faces at the same time, but we're going to select all these other faces and then press Ctrl I, or maybe it'll be better if we select an edge over here and then we go to vertex select mode and press Shift G, select similar amount of adjacent faces, then we just got to deselect the vertices on the corners. And if we go back to edge select mode, now we can scale these edges down individually. So scale these edges down to 0 to turn these little faces into triangles. And now we screwed up because we rotated this geometry in edit mode, so we can't use local axes to move this in the other direction like this. But what we can do is place a 3D cursor here in the middle and delete all this geometry from this side. Then we can use the 3D cursor as the pivot point and take all this geometry and duplicate it and rotate by 180 degrees to bring to the other side. Now merge vertices by distance, and now we have the other side of this surface as well. Now we just got to duplicate this and bring it here and also over here. Now we're about to use a shrink wrap modifier, so I think it's going to be best if we disassemble this shoe, and that way we can see only the surface where we're going to project these shapes. So once we got everything out of the way, we're going to select this and go add modifier, deform. We're going to add a shrink wrap modifier. Target the surface below, and we're going to set the wrap method to project. As you can see, it's projected on the surface pretty well, but the parts that are extended out of the surface are all fucked up, so we're going to have to trim those away. Before we apply the modifier, let's duplicate this so we can have a backup. We're also going to hide it with H. Now apply the modifier, and now we're going to get rid of this extra geometry. So over here, I want to get rid of these faces going back there, also these over here at the top. I'm going to keep these here because this might still be visible, and now I'm going to go X delete faces. We got some more mess over here, so we're going to use the brush select tool to select the vertices and delete them. And we're just going to go around the rest of this shape and delete whatever we got to delete. Now let's bring back the other parts of this shoe and put everything back together to see what we can see here. As you can see, there are some parts which were cut away that shouldn't have been cut away, so we're going to have to fill this part in. And we can do that by just extruding this vertex out here manually. We're going to have to push that backwards a little bit so it's still on the surface. And now fill this. You can have a triangle over here, that's fine. Also give me a new face over here, and we're pretty much going to have to do this manually because there's not really another way to do it. And now once we've filled in the gaps, now we can just extrude this, Alt S to give it a little bit of thickness. When you do that, you might have to move some of the geometry over here at the top because that might start clipping through this surface up here. But now we're just going to select all the sharp geometry and we're going to bevel it with Control B. And now once again, I'm only going to use one segment on this bevel because that way when I use the subdivision surface modifier, it makes these triangles a little bit round. And if you look at the reference image, they're not supposed to be too sharp. Going back to material preview, you can see we did a pretty damn good job. I think this looks pretty cute. I think it's about time we talk about the shoelaces. So in the next section, we're going to add the shoelaces and the holes that they're supposed to go through. First, we need to make the holes through which we're going to run the shoelaces. We're going to need 1 hole, 2 holes, 3 holes, 4 holes, 5 holes, 6 holes, 7 holes on this side, and 7 holes on the other side. Now, the method that I have for making these holes is this. I want to take a vertex on each side of this surface like this, then press Ctrl+, then inset with I, then W loop tools, turn that into a little circle. Now, if you adjust that circle a little bit and then you go W loop tools bridge, you're going to have a hole just like that. Of course, we're going to adjust it a little bit and make it a little bit nicer, but this is a technique that I want to use. Now the problem is the geometry is kind of fucked up and there's a lot of places where we have long faces like this. So if we inset that, it's kind of hard to turn this into a circle and it just gives you a pretty big mess. So what I'm going to do first is create a bunch of loop cuts like this, and that way I'm going to be able to balance out the length of the edges along this shape right here. I want to try and make it so I have more or less only square surfaces like this. So once I added what I believe to be enough loop cuts to this surface, I'm going to select all these edges and I'm going to use my loop tools to make the edges equally long. So to do that, I'm going to select an edge segment like this and nothing beyond that. And then in edge select mode, I'll go up here to select loops, and here I can click on edge rings. That's going to select all the edges which are parallel to the ones that I had selected before. So now I can go W loop tools space, and as you can see, that's going to make them all equally long. If this shit is a little bit jagged, you can always go W loop tools relax, and that's going to make it a little bit smoother. In my case, I don't think I need that because this is already pretty good. So now we have to choose the locations for the holes. We're going to have one up here, another one over here, then we have 3, 4, 5, 6, and look at that, that's almost perfect 7 right here. Now once again, we're going to duplicate this just to back it up in case we fuck something up, because this is going to be pretty tedious work. So give me one vertex loop here, then I'm going to skip 2 vertices and select another one and do the same thing a couple more times like this. And I wanted to press Ctrl+, but the problem is that when you do that, it expands the selection to the next vertex, and if we select these vertices, which is going to happen when we press Ctrl+, at the same time we select these vertices because of this one over here, we have all of these vertices here selected, and since we're in vertex select mode, that's also going to select these edges here. So what we can do is just do Ctrl+, and then in face select mode, deselect these face loops in between. As you can see, that simultaneously deselects everything on both sides, and now it looks like we're good. So now we're going to inset with I. We're going to check edge rail down here to make this a little bit cleaner, and then go W loop tool circle. We're going to uncheck flatten, and we're going to scale this down a bit more. Now since we modified the geometry on this object, we have to make sure that we didn't bust up this surface too much. What I mean is that sometimes when you use your circles loop tools or something like that, it busts up your geometry, so you end up with something like this, and you want to try and avoid that. But as you can see, if we look at this surface, it looks pretty smooth, it looks pretty good. I think we're going to be good to go. I don't think there's any way to instantly bridge all of these at the same time, because if we use the bridge tool, Blender's not going to know which edge loops we're trying to bridge together. It might think that we're trying to bridge this one with this one over there. He doesn't know what the fuck we're talking about. So I think the best thing we can do is just delete all this geometry and try to do it manually. In this case, I also want to straighten this out a little bit, so I'm going to fill this with F and press Shift 7 to align my view with this surface. That way I can rotate it around an axis which is aligned with my view like this. Now select these two edge loops, W bridge edge loops, and we're just going to keep doing that individually with every single hole. Now if we want to adjust the size of all these holes, we got to be very careful, but here's what you can do. First, we're going to select an edge loop around the top in edge select mode and press Shift G, select similar face angles. In this case, the threshold is going to be 0.2 because that works best, and I've tried. I'm going to check if I missed anything. I missed this one over here, and I also want to make sure I don't select any edges on the corners like this. And now with individual origins, I can scale these rings down individually. It's very important that you do this in edge select mode, because if you're in vertex select mode, you also have geometry selected, which connects these two edge loops at the top and the bottom of each hole, which means Blender no longer treats this as two separate selections as it did when we had two rings. Now it's just one selection, so if we use individual origins, it's also going to scale down towards the middle and it's going to fuck up the surface. Now since we don't want that, we only want to shrink these towards the middle of each circle individually and not the middle of the hole. We're going to do this in edge select mode, and that way, as you can see, the circles get smaller but they don't get closer to each other. Now while we got them selected, we're going to press Ctrl B to bevel them. That's just going to tighten them up a little bit like this. And I'm going to press Ctrl minus to reduce the selection like this. Now I only have the sharp angles here selected, and I'm going to add this to a new vertex group, which I'm going to assign here. That way, if I deselect everything, I can just click on this vertex group and click on select. That's going to instantly select these edges here, so I can easily scale them down again. But now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So first I have to count how many faces I have here. I'm going to select and face loop like this, then go up here and check statistics. As you can see over here, we have 23 faces selected. Over here on this side, we currently have only 12 faces, so we got to add a whole bunch of loop cuts to turn everything into squares. Now I added some loop cuts. Now we got 23 faces over here as well. So we're going to do the same thing we did before. Select this, go to select loops, edge rings, W loop tools space, maybe W loop tools relax. And now you get the idea. I'm not going to go over all this again. I'm going to make the holes first, and then we're going to get back to the shoelaces. Now that we got all the holes taken care of, let's start talking about the shoelaces. Now we're going to add some shoelaces. So let me show you how to do this right way. First, we're going to have to run a curve through each of these holes and arrange it the same way you arrange the fucking shoelaces on a real shoe. If you look at this shoe right here, the shoelace starts over here and then it goes this way and then it goes this way and it goes this way. So it's zigzagging, but you also have to pay attention to the fact that it goes underneath from this side and it comes out on top. And then it goes underneath this shoelace and it comes out on top of the other side. So this is all something that we have to keep in mind when we're making these shoelaces. And we're also going to have to pay attention to the fact that these shoelaces are really wide out here, but then they get really narrow as they have to pass through the hole, and this is where they kind of bend. This is what makes this a little bit difficult. It's not difficult for me, but it might be difficult for you. That's why you're watching this video. And this is the type of shit that you're going to be able to figure out pretty easily if you get my ebook. So check out my ebook with the link below. I go deep on all sorts of techniques that you probably never heard of before, especially if you're a beginner. And by the way, the ebook's also included in the course, so anybody who signs up for the course, they're also going to get the ebook, and you get to join a community. You're going to be able to hang out and talk to other people that are doing this professionally. Anyway, let's get back to the shoelaces. We're going to select these edge loops right here and press Shift G, select similar face angles. That way I'm selecting all the edges around the holes at the top and the bottom. I'm going to deselect this stuff over here on the corners, and I'm also going to check the other side because now these two are part of the same object. So once I got these selected, I'm going to go to individual origins and I'm going to press P to separate by selection. When you separate by selection, again, this also duplicates the geometry. And now we're going to press S and scale to 0, which is going to turn each circle into a single vertex. We're going to select 2 vertices at a time and fill them with F, then do it in the next 2 and the next 2 and so on. And one by one, we're going to turn each of these into an edge instead of just 2 vertices. And after we do that, we can just scale them up a little bit individually. And now we can start connecting these as a curve. So we're going to add 2 levels of subdivision surface with Control 2. And let's start down here at the bottom, because you remember that at the bottom we had this outer part over here. So these 2 holes are supposed to be connected from the top, which means we're going to take these 2 vertices outside and fill them with F. Now give me 2 or 3 loop cuts like this, and we're going to bring those out by looking at them from the side like this. Let's scale this up a little bit and also pull this vertex out a little bit further. You want to make sure that this curve is not colliding with the mesh over here. And now we can look at the reference and figure out what to do next. So we have this first piece of the shoelace over here, and then on the outer side of the outer shoe, that's this part over here, goes underneath and it goes below here and over to the other hole. But this side goes on top of that that shoelace. So we have to take this vertex and extrude it out kind of like this, bring it over here across the middle. We have to, of course, make sure that it's above the surface, but we're going to try and keep it as close to the surface as possible, so that once we bring it over here to the other side like this, or we can also just fill it with F on this part, we can take the other side and then extrude that and make that go over this one. We have to be very careful with how we do that because it's pretty hard to see what's going on since we just have infinitely thin lines here. Now, there's no easy way to do it. There's no way to make this shit more fun. This is a pain in the ass. That's how it is sometimes in 3D modeling. There's nothing you can do about it. Either you're going to do it or you're not going to do it. I don't want to hear no complaining. I don't feel like doing this shit when there's a camera in my face, so I'm going to cut the camera and I'm going to get back to you when I finish doing this. I wish I could give you a cool way to make shoelaces, but there is no such thing. You're pretty much going to have to use that string that we just created and extrude it out to create this. And after that, you're going to have to manually adjust the shape on the sides here and make the folds so everything fits into the holes. You're going to have to make this part wider and this part thinner. So let me quickly show you how to do that, and then you're going to be able to figure out the rest. So currently we just have an infinitely thin string running through these holes. And to turn that into shoelace, you're going to go to top view like this, and you're just going to extrude it this way a little bit. Then press Ctrl I to invert the selection and extrude it out the other way like this. You're going to have to lower this part down and probably lift this part up a little bit. And for now, you want to try and adjust this geometry so that this surface here is more or less flat and not curved like this. Once you've done that, now you can start positioning the parts of the shoelace that go through the hole. And as you know, these parts are supposed to look a little bit twisted. So you're going to take these edges from the sides like this and pull it out like this, while the edge in the middle is going to be closer to the side, so we get this curved shape. And yes, you're going to have to do this manually for every single part of the shoelace. Once you've done that on every single hole, you can go ahead and apply a little bit of subdivision surface. And we don't need to have this many edge loops, so we're going to select some of them like this, and we're going to press X, dissolve edges. Now after we dissolve those edge loops, the result is that we now have more edges which are perpendicular to the shoelace, which is what we're going to use to control the width of the shoelace later on. But before we do that, we're once again going to add some subdivision surface. So let's try one level with Control 1, and then we can select an entire surface above the hole, such as this one right here. In edge select mode, we're going to deselect these edges, then go to individual origins and scale these edges up. You can deselect the last few edges like this and then scale it up even further. You might have to rotate this from the side, and you're also probably going to have to move this out of the way a little bit so you have space for the other shoelace. And make sure to make the shoelaces wide enough. As you can see at my final result over here, the shoelaces are pretty damn wide. If they're thin, it's going to look stupid, but you might have a different shoe from what I'm making, so just figure it out. At some point, you're going to get the right shape for your shoelaces like this, and then you can just select everything and press E to extrude, Alt S to inflate to give them some thickness. And now if you want to UV unwrap this shape, you're going to add a loop cut here and on this side as well. Then you're going to select those two loop cuts and press Ctrl E, mark seam. You're also going to have to select the geometry which is right inside the hole like this, and you're going to mark those as seams, so that way when you unwrap this, each part of the shoelace is going to have its own separate surface. Otherwise, your UV map is going to be all fucked up. It's going to look like a pair of headphones after you left it in your jeans for 3 days. And if you separate these, you're going to have some tiles which you can control individually, and that's going to allow you to control how you display the texture on the shoelaces. Once you've done that, you're just going to press U, unwrap, and then your UV map should look something like this. As you can see, these are the surfaces of the shoelaces which are cut on the sides where the holes are, where they get a little bit thinner than this part. Now, probably the most important part of making shoes or clothes of any sort is the texturing. The textures are what's going to allow us to create all these details that you can see over here. This is not part of the model. This is just a texture that I put on top of the model. So this is what we're going to talk about in the next section. Now here's the procedure that I use to texture this shoe. As an example, I'm going to show you how I textured this particular piece in the middle of the shoe right here. And on this piece, we also got some stitches, we got some holes, we got some text, we got some lines, we got a lot of things going on. And once you understand how I texture that, you're also going to figure out how I did this, because it's all basically the same shit. And it's really important that you understand how to do this, because if you understand how to do this, you're going to be able to texture almost anything in Blender. You're not going to have to be a criminal and go get Substance Painter, because I know you guys are not paying for that shit. First, you're going to take the surface and you're going to separate it a little bit, and you're going to try and UV unwrap this into a 2D surface. So in this case, this is a paper thin surface, so I can just UV unwrap the surface as it is, and it's going to be projected on 2 dimensions. And if I switch to my UV editor up here, you can see what this surface looks like in 2D. So this is the UV map of this object right here. Once you have the surface UV unwrapped, you're going to go up here to UV, export UV layout. I suggest you make a new folder where you're going to put all the texture files for this particular project, and you're going to give this a recognizable name such as UV shoe body. And once you export the UV layout, it should look something like this. This is a PNG, so it's a transparent background image, which is really important. I've made some markings on this one, but I'm going to show you why I did that in a second. Now we made a new material on the surface of this shoe, and we're going to drag and drop this UV map into this material. Plug that into base color so that the UV grid is used as a texture. And then we have to
make some markings like this so that we know where the features are. If you look at the reference image like this, you can see we have some stitches over here, we got some holes over here, we got campus written right here, and we're going to have to create all these features as part of the texture. Now the problem is that when you're looking at the UV map itself, you can't really see where those features are supposed to be exactly unless you mark them on the surface. And this is really important because we're going to create those features with the UV map right here. We're not going to create them on the 3D model. We're going to create them as a texture, and then later we're going to apply that back to the shoe. So you're going to place your image reference in front of your shoe like this. It has to have a little bit of transparency so you can see through it. And now you're going to select this surface. You're going to select this image texture node with the UV grid loaded into it. You're going to switch over to the texture paint workspace, and this is going to allow you to paint stuff on the image or into the 3D workspace. We're going to set the brush size to something small like 2, and now when we go to side view, we can paint on the shoe through this image right here. So if you just make a line like this, you're going to be able to see that line on your 3D model, and we're looking at this through the image so you can tell where the features are. For example, we're going to mark this area right here so we know where the campus text is supposed to be, and now when you look at the model, you can see that this feature is included right here. We did the same thing for the dots here, for the stitches in the front, and whatever else we have to create here. And after that's finished, you're going to go over here to image, save as, and you're going to save this image to your computer. This is going to be used as a reference image in the next segment. So now you're going to want to do this for every single part of this shoe. For example, these surfaces right here, we don't have any stitches on this part, but you might have to add something else. And we got 2 more pieces in the back here where we're going to have to do something similar. So once you have all those images exported, so you have UV maps for every surface on the shoe, you're going to take that shit to a new file, and you're going to use that new file to create the features which you want to create on the shoe. So now next I'm going to show you how I made these stitches as normal maps over here, how I made these little holes, how I made the campus text, how I made this line here, how I did all this shit in the back, and how I managed to combine all those features with an actual texture that I've downloaded from the internet. The same technique is also going to be used to create this texture for the shoelaces. So now we're going to make some stitches in a new Blender file, which we're going to be able to apply back on that shoe. Now, once again, you have to remember this same technique can be used to create any other kind of detail. But you're going to go to top view, you're going to get rid of the default cube. Then with Shift A, you're going to load up an image reference, and you're going to load in the image on which we painted the features in the other Blender file. Now, currently this is a bit too bright, but you can go over here to image properties, check opacity, and just reduce this a little bit. Now this is going to become a little bit transparent, but you're still going to be able to see the white lines that you marked here. So let me quickly show you how you can make these stitches over here and the other features. You're going to place your 3D cursor right here, where we have the beginning of the first set of stitches. With Shift A, we're going to add a new plane. Then in edit mode, you're going to press X, collapse edges and faces. Now we just got one vertex. You're going to extrude that once, extrude it one more time, then extrude it up here to the middle and again, and then one more time over here at the end. You have to try and keep the number of edges even. So we got 2 edges over here, 2 edges here, and 2 edges here. The reason for this is that all the edges have to have approximately the same length. Don't worry, we're going to subdivide this in a second. Now you're going to do the same shit over here on the inside. So we're going to just duplicate a vertex and extrude it again and mark these lines here. And once you've done that, you're going to press Ctrl 2 for subdivision surface, and you're going to take these vertices in the corners and press E to extrude them. Just make them stick out a little bit like this. You can just lower them down a little bit if you want to. And now once this is done, you might have to adjust the position of these vertices just so you can change the shape of the curve that you have here. But then you're going to apply the subdivision surface modifier, get rid of these vertices down here at the bottom. And in case it's not obvious, the reason we had these vertices down here was so we can sharpen these corners, because for some reason when you have a one-dimensional object like this and you try to go over here to item set mean vertex crease, you can set that to whatever you want, but it's not going to make the corner any sharper. So instead we're just going to extrude this down, and now it's a sharp corner. So now we can apply the subdivision surface modifier, delete this geometry, and we're good. Now just to make sure that everything is even, we're going to go to W loop tool space. And that might fuck up the shape of this curve a little bit, but we're going to go to top view. We're going to adjust this a little bit. We're going to make sure that the corners are nice and sharp. It's supposed to be something like this. Then you're going to select all this geometry and press V once. Then right click and you want to press V again until you get this error right here which says rip failed. This means that you ripped everything. I'm doing this because when you select a vertex and you press V to tear, it's going to split it from the vertex that it's connected to. And if we do this with all the vertices simultaneously, then all the edges are going to become separated. So you're going to rip this once, rip this twice, and now when you go to individual origins and you press 2 for edge select mode, you can scale the edges down individually and they're going to be separated, as you can see. And this is what we're going to use to make the stitches. So now give me W subdivide. I'll go over here to the subdivide menu and set the number of cuts to 2. Select a vertex at the end and press Shift G. Select similar amount of connecting edges. Now extrude this downwards a little bit like this. Press Ctrl 1 for subdivision surface. You can apply that and go over here to object, convert to curve. Once you've done that, you can go to curve properties over here, open up the geometry menu, go down here to bevel, and you're going to set the depth to something like 0.00001 0.001. You can adjust this figure to whatever is suitable for you. I'm going to try 0.002. But anyway, something like this looks about right. Now you can go to Object, Shade Smooth, and now in Object Mode, you're going to go back to Object, Convert to Mesh. So now this is a mesh, which means now you can bake this as a normal map on another surface. Now I'm just going to throw this in there to make sure you subscribe to the fucking channel. I'm going to show you how to make these holes on the side of the shoe, which is basically the same shit, but it's not exactly the same. So here's how you do it. We're going to click here to place a 3D cursor right there. Then with Shift A, we're going to add a new circle, which can have, let's say, 16 vertices. Scale this down so it's the size of the hole. And by the way, I know this because I made a little spot here, which is exactly the size of one hole. So it's going to be approximately this large. And if you want to be cool, you can bust the shape up a little bit by turning on proportional editing and then pulling this to the side a little bit like this. Now you're going to press E to extrude and lift this up a little bit. Then E to extrude and right click and scale this up, and then do the same thing one more time. Take the bottom and fill it with F and add a subdivision surface modifier. Now you're going to open up viewport overlays and check face orientation. You want to make sure this is blue and not red. If it's red, you're going to select everything with A and press Control N, recalculate normals down here, and it's going to be blue. Everything has got to be blue, so even the stitch has got to be blue, so make sure. Now we're going to use this to make all the other holes, so you're going to duplicate this and place it on all the other spots that we marked. Same thing over here on the front. You're going to have to do this one more time on the other side, so just duplicate everything and take it over there as well. Then you're going to place the 3D cursor onto this object right here with Shift S, and with Shift A you're going to add a plane. Scale that by a factor of 2.5, so it's exactly the same size as this UE map. And you're going to lift this up so it's just a little bit above these details right here. You also want to make sure that these details are in the same object, so you're going to join them with Control J. Select the plane that we added, go to the shading workspace, add a new material, and with Shift A you're going to add an image texture node. Create a new image here, which is going to be 4096 by 4096. Down here, make sure it's blank and check 32-bit float. Click on new image. You're going to set the color space to non-color. Select these details over here in object mode and shift select the plane, and make sure that this image right here is selected. Then go to render properties, set your render engine to cycles, set your number of samples to 1, scroll down to bake, open that up, set the bake type to normal, check selected to active, set the margin size to 2, and now you're gonna hit bake and wait. And hopefully within a couple of seconds, you're gonna get a purple image down here in your image editor. And on this image, you're gonna see the details which you just baked. If you wanna add some more details, you can just add them onto this object and then bake this again the same way I just showed you over this image. Now in the image editor, open up this menu, go to image, save as, and you're going to save this image somewhere to your computer. We're also going to need an ambient occlusion map because otherwise the stitches are not even going to be visible. So after you save this normal map, you're going to get rid of it using this little X button right here. Then generate a new image. You're going to name that something like shoe body AO because that stands for ambient occlusion. We're going to bake the shading. New image. You can leave the color space on sRGB. And now you're going to adjust this object where you have the details by selecting these holes right here and removing them somewhere down here. We just want this ambient occlusion for the stitches. And we're also going to need another plane right underneath these stitches. So you're going to add that to the same spot where you added the plane before. And we have to bring this surface as close as possible to the stitches, so it's something like this. So it looks like these stitches are sewn into this new plane. And this has to be part of the same object. That's very important. Now select the plane with the stitches, then shift select the plane where you have this ambient occlusion shit going on. In your render properties tab, you're going to set the render samples to something like 256 or maybe even 512. Go down here and set the bake type to ambient occlusion. Now hit bake and wait a couple of seconds. You can go roll some TikToks. And after this is baked, it's going to look something like this. As you can see, it's just a black and white image. Again, you're going to save this to your computer. And now you're almost ready to start putting everything together. Now you just got to go to the internet. And this is where we're going to get a texture for the shoe. So I went to ambient CG. I searched for fabric. I'm going to use this one right here because this one worked pretty well. We're going to download 2K PNG right here. And when you download that texture from ambient CG, this is what you're going to find in the file. You got your color map right here. You got two normal maps. You always want to use GL in Blender. Forget about DX. We got a roughness map. That's all we need. Now here's how you put everything together. And by the way, I did the same shit with all these other parts. It's all exactly the same thing. If you understand how I did this, you're going to be able to make anything. And you will understand because I'm about to show you. So we got a material on this shoe right now. It's just a basic gray material. It doesn't matter. It can be purple. We're going to open up this folder where we got the textures that we downloaded. Drag and drop the color map into the file. Drag and drop normal GL into the file. Let's also do roughness even though it doesn't really matter too much. Now first plug color into base color like this. I want to make this texture a little bit finer, so I'm going to select this image texture node and press Ctrl T to get these other nodes right here. If Ctrl T doesn't do anything for you, it's because you got to go up here to edit preferences, add-ons. You got to search for something called the node wrangler. Check this thing right here and that's going to allow you to add these new nodes with Ctrl T. It's going to be plugged up like this. You got UV plugged into vector, you got this plugged into the image texture node, and you're going to go down here to scale and select all three of them and set this to something like 3 or 4. As you can see now the texture becomes finer. Down here we're going to add a normal map node. You're going to select this normal map texture and press Ctrl T as well and make sure that the scale is set to the same as what you had before. So in this case it's got to be 3. This has to be non-color, plug that into color, plug normal into normal, and now you got a little normal map right here. But we're about to use 2 normal maps, so pay attention. We also need to load in the normal map where we created the stitches. So I've got this texture right here that I called body normal. This is where I got the stitches, this is where I got the lines on the side and everything else that I need here. This also has to be non-color. With Shift A, I'm gonna search for and add a mix color node. Place that right here. You're gonna plug this previous normal map into color B and this one into color A. You're gonna plug the result into the color in the normal map node. And this is gonna allow you to combine 2 normal maps. So if you want to see this a little bit better, you're gonna unplug base color and then zoom on the mix color node. And as you can see, when you slide this slider right here, you can combine the 2 normal maps. If you set it to something closer to 0, you're gonna be more on the A color side, which means more body normal map, the shit that we baked. If your factor is closer to 1, you're gonna have only this texture right here, which is the fabric texture. So as you can see, we gotta find the right balance here so we can combine the 2 normal maps. Now we got the stitches, now we got the holes, we got the campus text that I created off camera and everything else. You might have to increase the normal map strength here to something like 5 if you want to make this visible. Just make sure to reduce the factor in favor of the stitches normal map if you do this, because otherwise this shit's gonna get crazy. And now we also need ambient occlusion, because otherwise, as you can see, we can't even see the stitches. So I've got body AO right here, meaning body ambient occlusion, and this is where I got the shading for the stitches. And I'm gonna use this image to tell Blender where we're supposed to have some shadows around the stitches. So here's how you do that. With Shift A, you're gonna add a mix color node. You're gonna plug your color map here, not into base color, but into the B input of the mix color node. You're gonna plug the ambient occlusion texture into the factor value and the result into base color. And color A is the color which you want appearing on the spots which are black on this image. So currently this is white. We're gonna set this to black. As you can see, now we get some shading around these stitches. If you feel like it's not strong enough, you can always add a math node right here, set this to power, increase the exponent to whatever you want, and now the shading is gonna be more visible. Finally, if you want to texture paint some details, here's how you do that. Select this surface where we just added all these textures. With Shift A, you're going to add a new image texture node right here. Generate a new image there. It can be 4096 by 4096. Name that whatever you want. I'm going to name it Shoe Color Baked because we're about to bake this texture so we can paint on it. Currently, this image texture is projected not from the UVs, but from the node wrangler. So you're going to select the image texture node where you just generated this image. Go to render properties, scroll down to bake, and you're going to set the bake type to diffuse here. Make sure to uncheck direct and indirect. Make sure to uncheck selected to active, and then you're gonna click bake right here to bake this image. After that's baked, you're gonna plug that image texture into the base color input, and now you're gonna have an image like this that you can paint on with texture painting. So go over to the texture painting workspace, and now you can use your brush to do whatever the fuck you want on this object. I set my brush size to something small like 3. I set the brush color to black, and then I got up close to these holes and I just made these black spots on the middle of the holes. You just have to make a little spot like this in the middle of the hole, and you're gonna have a hole. It's gonna look like it's actually there when it's not. I use texture painting to paint these logos here using stencils, but I'm not gonna show you that in this video. I don't wanna sit here all day explaining the same shit all over again, but here's how I made a texture for the shoelaces. I modeled this surface right here using array modifiers. I baked that as a normal map onto this plane, and then I just applied that normal map onto the shoelaces, and what do you know? It looks like shoelaces. There are a lot more details on this shoe right here, but it's all basically the same shit. You saw how I create them. So if you paid attention to what I was talking about, you're going to be able to create all of this yourself as well. So just like that, we got $200. If you want to learn more about the techniques that you see me use in this video, check out my Blender course. We're going to help you build a portfolio. We're going to teach you everything you need to know about getting clients. And before you know it, you can get paid for making 3D models as well. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.